Hi, folks. Dr. Carter here again. I thought I would do sort of a run through of the remaining parts of Part-Time Indian. Basically, this is going to be sort of a stream of consciousness type of video where I just follow along the book, talk about things that I thought were important and that were interesting to me when I read it. I'll tell you what page I start on, and you can follow along as best you're able. It might help you. It might help you a little bit. Might help you a lot. Might not help you at all. I just want to let you know that I'm not in a prison. This is my office. You can see that here's the Carter. It's there. So it doesn't look like I'm in much of a place, but I am. So please don't think that I'm holed off in a bathroom somewhere, even though I thought that was what I was going to have to do to make sure we didn't get interrupted. So we may get interrupted. So just do your best to put up with that. It's just how things go sometimes. I hope you enjoyed the last video. If you didn't, go see it. Well, if you didn't enjoy it, don't go see it again. But if you haven't looked at it, maybe go look at it. So I'm actually going to pick up on page 54, How to Fight Monsters. And this is as Junior is getting ready to start at Reardon. And he says over on 55, I have to do this. So he is confident in the choice that he's making, even though he's probably a little scared and a little anxious. However, he says on page 55, you can't just betray your tribe and then change your mind 10 minutes later. I was on a one-way bridge. There's no way to turn around, even if I wanted to. So even though he feels like he has to do this, there is also that part of him who feels like he is betraying his tribe, his place at the reservation. So that is a tension that he is feeling as he moves on. His father says, those white people aren't better than you. Remember this. Okay. So getting out of that cycle of internalized inferiority. Of course, the very next sentence is, but he was wrong. And he knew he was wrong. He was the loser Indian father of a loser Indian son living in a world built for winners. And so, again, the reality that we think we know and how that affects us, right? He could very well say, hey, I'm going to go be the man and I'm going to do things nobody has done before. And we get that a little bit, but he is tempering it with this idea that maybe this won't work because I really am inferior. We are inferior. Of course, again, unreliable narrator. All right. The truth is he might have to work a little harder, but he might be able to make something of himself. And that all Indians are probably not the way he describes them. He's basing the narrative on, of course, his lived experience, not the experience of total living. A little bit of interesting situational irony over on the next page. He was going to Reardon, whose mascot was an Indian, thereby making me the only other Indian in town. So the situational irony there is he gets to a place where he thinks he's going to be an Indian, but everybody's an Indian, but only through mascot. Okay. So in that way, it's a little bit of situational irony. It's also a little bit of just a coincidence. So everybody's an Indian, but only he is really the true Indian. Okay. And so he gets there and he notices the mascot. And so there's a connection, but disconnection, sort of bringing him in, but also an othering happening at the same time. And of course, we get this interesting dichotomy here. And if you can see my notes here, you can say that you can see that, again, going back to him being an unreliable narrator, a teenage kid who really hasn't figured out the world yet, even though he is obviously bright. He is conflating all good things with being white and all bad things with being Indian, or upper class socioeconomic strata with white and lower class socioeconomic strata with Indian. Even though a few pages ago he told us, there are places where white people are poorer than you ever would have realized or could have imagined. And of course, he doesn't say very much about brown people beyond Indians at all. So we know that this is not reality. This is not the world. Okay. Even within white, there are folks who are well off, those folks who are not well off. And as other authors have said of this book, there are people who are middle class or even higher on some reservations. But again, this is the mindset of a kid trying to make something of himself and be sort of the trailblazer in his community. All right. So it feels like that's what the world is for him. I also got down here that he's conflating race and class, if that helps you make sense of this. He meets Penelope over on page 59, all right, who is totally, absolutely gorgeous. Now, that's interesting because that is a coded name. If you remember, Odysseus's wife was named Penelope, and she was sort of his rock as he went on his journey. Right. Yeah. So yeah, we're getting more mileage out of the hero's journey here. We could absolutely think about that metaphor and apply it to Junior's life as well. So he's leaving the threshold at this moment, leaving the res, going into the unknown, the world of Reardon. He's going to make friends. He's going to make enemies. He's going to get help, hopefully. And he's going to have trials and tribulations, and then we'll see what the return is, whether he goes back to the res or he moves into some other new phase of his life and begins to cycle over again. So we've got that. But Penelope, again, the name of Odysseus's wife and sort of his rock as he was going out there. He says, I'll eventually get back to Penelope. I'll eventually get back to Penelope. So we've got that. At the same time, over around 5960, that Penelope is named, we finally get the narrator named as well. So I went ahead and told you his name was Junior or Arnold, okay? It's not until about 60 pages in that we actually get his name, though. He says his name is Junior over on page 59. And then he tells his other name, Arnold Spirit, over on 61, as the teacher says it. Okay. So it's interesting that for the first 60 pages, he sort of characterized himself as a nobody. And he was a nobody in terms of not having a name. But now we get Junior and we get Arnold all at the same time. You know, the top of 61, he says, I felt like two different people inside one body, getting back to that splicing, that dichotomy again. No, I felt like a magician slicing myself in half, with Junior living on the north side of the Spokane River and Arnold living on the south. So there he goes. Who is he as he crosses the threshold and becomes a new person? All right. Someone makes fun of him for the way he talks. He doesn't talk for another 6 days. The unofficial and unwritten Spokane Indian rules of fisticuffs. You can look at that on page 61 and 62. But basically, it's saying you have to fight in almost every situation. And this is sort of a foreshadowing to what happens a little further on in the text. Over on 63, he's saying that he went from being a small target in Welpinit to being a larger target in Reardon. He says, all those pretty white girls ignored me, but that was okay. Indian girls ignored me too, so I was used to it. But a few of those Reardon boys, the big jocks, paid special attention to me. And they called him lots of names. All right. It's sort of derogatory names for someone who is Native American. You can see that on page 63. So a lot of what we call othering is going on. And that is when one person or a group of people make another group of people or another person feel less than human, that they're not human, they are other. And Arnold already feels like the other. Okay. He's internalized that otherness, but now he's getting it from the students as well. But he's not just taking it. He says, I let them call me names while I tried to figure out what to do. All right. And finally, Roger, one of those big jocks, says something to him that was just really terrible. And over on page 65, he punches Roger in the face. All right. His nose bled like red fireworks. So, what we really see is Arnold making a series of choices, and then we see the reactions and the consequences of those choices. And here he's decided he's not going to take being called names. And so he punches one of the biggest guys and bloodies his nose. He says, I felt brave all of a sudden. Yeah, maybe it was just a stupid and immature schoolyard fight, or maybe it was the most important moment of my life, where he said, I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm going to stand up for myself. Maybe I was telling the world that I was no longer a human target. Towards the bottom there, he talks about this whole new set of rules and this new culture. He doesn't know what the rules are. So as he's making decisions, he feels like he doesn't have something to anchor him. And for him, he's literally in uncharted territory. He doesn't know what the cultural expectations are, like there were on the res. And so that gives him a sense of uncertainty. Moving forward, grandmother gives me some advice, talks about how men and boys are like packs of wild dogs, and the alpha male, and him being the new dog. So he pushes you around to see how things are. You see that he really loves his grandmother, and that his grandmother is a bit of a character. She's also sort of a sage figure and gives him some advice. Further on, we meet Eugene, who is sort of his dad's best friend and sort of the cool role model for him. All right, and Eugene actually tells him, "I'm 71. It's pretty cool that you're doing this," and so that really makes him look up to Eugene even more. I'm just going to look at spots that I think are interesting and talk to them, talk to you about them. Tears of a Clown over on 75. Uh, Rowdy and Arnold are having another conversation. So they're trying to sort of make do um, with their situation. Right, the whole idea of Halloween is someone going as homeless, as sort of to protest the treatment of homeless people in this country. He's going to ask us for spare change instead of candy. All right. Okay. I mean, Arnold thinks, I don't really get it, but all right. So he says, I admired her commitment. I wanted to admire my commitment too, so I lied. Well, I'm wearing this to protest the treatment of homeless Native Americans in this country, because he says he went dressed as a homeless dude at school day for Halloween. Over on 79, we get the reservations response to Arnold. A few folks, especially the grandmothers, thought I was a brave little dude for going to a white school, but there were a lot of more people who just called me names and slammed the door in my face. Mostly, they just wanted to remind me that I was a traitor and they wanted to steal my candy and my money. Over on 81, well, buddy, he would have said, the first thing you have to do is change the way you look, the way you talk, and the way you walk. And then she'll think you're freaking Prince Charming. So this is Junior's imagined advice from Rowdy about how to make Penelope fall in love with him. And he is head over heels, Arnold is, for Penelope. Next chapter, slouching towards Thanksgiving. He says, I wasn't a zombie, not at all, because you can't ignore zombies. So that made me, well, it made me nothing. Zero, zilch, nada. So again, that sort of internalizing. He says that this was the loneliest time of his life. He says, on the road to Reardon, I became something less than Indian. And once I arrived at Reardon, I became something less than Indian. So he's feeling like an outsider. Interesting thing that when they're talking about petrified wood, he actually corrects a teacher, but he also meets Gordy, who is as much of an intellectual presence as he is, maybe even more so. Mr. Dodge thanked Gordy, but didn't say another word to me. So are even some of the teachers treating him differently because of his ethnicity or his social class? I shrink back into my chair and remembered when I used to be a human being. On 87, I didn't do it for you, Gordy said. I did it for science. All right. So the whole idea of standing up for, not necessarily standing up for Arnold, but the truth. But we're going to see this as the start of a pretty good friendship between Gordy and Arnold. And that's good because he needs a friend, right? He needs a different type of foil than Rowdy. We learned that his sister ran away and got married over on page 89. He says, I realized that my sister was trying to live a romance novel. She was trying to live out her dream. She hadn't given up the reservation and tried to suffocate her and kept her trapped in a basement. And now she was out roaming the huge grassy fields of Montana. And he feels inspired by this. How cool. I felt inspired. I thought we were being warriors, he says. So he feels a little bit of solidarity. And it's good that he's connecting with people again, in both Gordy and his sister. He later says of Gordy, God, this kid was an 80-year-old literature professor trapped in the body of a 15-year-old farm boy. Later, he actually takes charge of a situation again. All right, he makes a decision and acts on it. He says, I want to be your friend, I said. Excuse me, he asked. I want us to be friends, I said. Gordy stepped back. He says, I assure you, he said, I am not homosexual. Again, this sort of weirdness when it comes to boys trying to be close, okay, as if there's only one way to be close, but boys trying to navigate that emotional landscape, right? But it says that they did become good friends. Not the best of friends, not like Rowdy and me. We didn't share secrets or dreams, but we studied together. Gordy taught me how to study, and he taught me how to read and read deeply like we try to do in class. He talks about drawing cartoons on 95, and he thinks that Gordy is going to think it's pathetic. Gordy says, no, not at all. If you're good at it and you love it and it helps you navigate the river of the world, then it can't be wrong. And I love that metaphor, navigating the river of the world. And that's what he's doing. He also says on 97, the world, even the smallest parts of it, is filled with things you don't know. All right. So this Gordy, pretty smart. He says of Gordy, he not only tutored me and challenged me, but he made me realize that hard work, that the act of finishing, of completing, of accomplishing a task is joyous. So the next time you're frustrated about, things in English class or some of your other classes, uh, being tedious, taking some time, or maybe even challenging you a little bit, try to find the joy in that hard work. Moving on, it's Thanksgiving. He goes over to Rowdy's house, knocks on the door. Rowdy's dad closed the door on me. I walked away, but I stopped at the end of the driveway and looked back. I could see Rowdy in the window of his upstairs bedroom. He was holding my cartoon. He was watching me walk away, and I could see the sadness in his face. I just knew he missed me too. There are just certain phrases and lines in here that are just beautiful, but also sort of heartbreaking, and that's one of them. He wanted to go see Rowdy, but he's not able to. Over on 107, he learns that even pretty white girls have problems. All right, I'm looking at an anorexic. I say a really hot anorexic. I wanted to add, but I don't. I'm not anorexic. She says I'm bulimic. She says it with her nose and chin in the air. She gets all arrogant, and then I remember that there are a bunch of anorexics who are proud to be skinny and starved freaks. All right, I'm not going to go there, but if you were to look at some research, there is sort of the idea of a superiority factor there in terms of those conditions, which is really strange. But the bigger idea here is that we're learning that Arnold's sense of this sort of white paradise is a place where there are no problems. It's just not true. All right, we'll learn about Earl a little bit later. Penelope's father. Penelope's father, Earl, is a racist. The first time I met him, he said, Kid, you better keep your hands out of my daughter's panties. She's only dating you because she knows it will piss me off. So I ain't going to get pissed. And if you ain't pissed, then she'll stop dating you. In the meantime, you just keep your trouser snake in your trousers and I won't have to punch you in the stomach. And then, you know what he said to me after that? Kid, if you get my daughter pregnant, if you make some charcoal babies, I'm going to disown her. I'm going to kick her out of my house and you'll have to bring her home to your mommy and daddy. You hear me straight, kid? This is all on you now. So on the one hand, he seems to be dating Penelope, which is a win for him. He's absolutely in love with her. Uh, on the other hand, we've got another Othello situation, right? With Brabantio saying, hey, okay, she's going to hang out with you. All right, this has got to be weird. It's not what I approve of. So it's on you now. You got to take care of her, but, don't mess up. So the situation, some similarities in terms of the racism, but also some differences in terms of, they're not married. So it's not quite the same as Othello and Desdemona. But there is that tension in this quote unquote interracial marriage. And so Arnold internalizes that too. Is she only hanging out with him because he is brown, because he's Native American? Did she want to get a little smudged, as he says on 110? And I was the smudge. But hey, I was kind of using her too. After all, I suddenly became popular. All right, he's dating a pretty girl. And people are like, hey, maybe there's something to this kid. Arnold, Penelope says one day after school, I hate this little town. It's too small, so small, too small. Everything about it is small. The people here have small ideas, small dreams. They all want to marry each other and live here forever. What do you want to do? I asked. I want to leave as soon as I can. I think I was born with a suitcase. So he's seeing that he's not the only person to think, oh my gosh, I've got to get out of here. There's got to be more to life. He's not the only teenager who's ever thought about that. And it's not just Native Americans who think about that, or poor people, okay? Uh, that we all often think there's got to be more to life than this. And we might make decisions about what to do based on that idea. She wants to go to Stanford to study architecture. She says she wants to build something beautiful. He says, and I couldn't make fun of her for that dream. It was my dream too. And Indian boys weren't supposed to dream like that. And white girls from small towns weren't supposed to dream big either. Are you dreaming big? Rowdy gives me advice about love. So she was all white on white on white, like the most perfect kind of vanilla dessert cake you've ever seen. I wanted to be her chocolate topping. So again, in his mind, white equals perfect, even though he's starting to see that that's not quite true. And brown equals dirty. All right. And of course, that's a false dichotomy. And it's always problematic when we see the world only in terms of A versus B, because there's so much diversity and diversities of diversity that really what we have is more like one of those scrunchies that has all those little strings coming from it, and there's like a million strings. Each one of those is like a reality or an aspect of reality. So we're really never, it's either this or it's that. And that's what he's trying to do. He needs to move beyond. He's having a conversation with Gordy. So what does that mean? I asked. I think it means you're just a racist asshole like everybody else. Wow. In his own way, Gordy the Bookworm was just as tough as Rowdy. All right. So finally, someone calls him on having his own sort of expectations or prejudices and biases regarding socioeconomic status, race, gender. All right. And so Gordy is really pushing his thinking. It's exactly what he needs. He needs to be pushed in terms of seeing that what he thinks is reality is not necessarily always reality. Page 118 and 19, dance, dance, dance. He says, I was half Indian in one place and half white in the other. And then boom, right there we are. We're back at dichotomies. He wants to sort of pass as someone who wasn't poor. What would they think of me if they knew I sometimes had to hitchhike to school? Yeah, so I pretended to have a little money. I pretended to be middle class. I pretended I belonged. Nobody knew the truth. Of course, you can't lie forever. Lies have short shelf lives. 121 wears this suit that, if memory serves, turns out to be a hit because it is so sort of retro, all right, at this dance. It's so retroactive. It's so retroactive that it's radioactive. All right, we hear on page 123. So drunk with my sudden power, I pulled off some lame disco dance moves that sent the place into hysterics. So he's having a moment at a dance. It's great. Afterwards, Roger invites them for pancakes. I had $5 in my pocket. What could I buy with that? Maybe one plate of pancakes, maybe. I was doomed. Now remember, Roger's a kid he hit in the face. I ordered pancakes for Penelope and me. I ordered orange juice and coffee and a side order of toast and hot chocolate and french fries too, even though I knew I wouldn't be able to pay for any of it. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever experienced that feeling of thinking you might not have enough money for something I bet some of you have, and it's pretty scary. So he's going ahead. He's going to play this game out until the bitter end, but he's also worried that he's going to be found out. He tells Roger that he forgot his wallet. Dude, Roger said, man, don't sweat it. You should have said something earlier. I got you covered. He opened his wallet and handed me $40. All right. So maybe Roger's not such a bad guy. All right. Or maybe Roger learned from his experience in his fight with Arnold. At 127, Penelope is talking to him. Roger told me he lent you some money, she said. Yeah, I said, I forgot my wallet. Her laser eyes grew hotter. Arnold, yeah? Can I ask you something big? Yeah, I guess. Are you poor? I couldn't lie anymore. Yes, I said, I'm poor. I figured she was going to march out of my life right then, but she didn't. Instead, she kissed me on the cheek. I guess poor guys don't get kissed on the lips. I was going to yell at her for being shallow, but then I realized that she was being my friend, being a really good friend, in fact. Roger was the one who guessed you were poor, she said. Oh, great. Now he's going to tell everybody. He's not going to tell anybody. Roger likes you. He's a great guy. He's like my big brother. He can be your friend, too. That sounded pretty good to me, but also probably impossible to some degree. I needed friends more than I needed my lust-filled dreams. All right, that's because he was staring at her cleavage as she was trying to have this moment with him. All right, so Roger, not exactly who he thought he was. Penelope, not exactly who he thought he was. She was a lot more complex than he had made them out to be. 129. And Roger, being kind of heart and generous of pocket, and maybe a little racist, drove me home that night. And he drove me home plenty of other nights too. And here's probably one of the better lines of the whole book. If you let people into your life a little bit, they can be pretty damn amazing. $131, having another conversation with Gordy. You still live there, don't you? You're just going to school here? I know, but some Indians think you have to act white to make your life better. Some Indians think you have to become white if you try to make your life better. Or some Indians think you become white if you try to make your life better, if you become successful. Then Gordy says something very intelligent. If that were true, then wouldn't all white people be successful? Man, Gordy was smart. I wish I could take him to the res and let him educate Rowdy. The people at home, I said, a lot of them call me Apple. They call me an apple because they think I'm red on the outside and white on the inside. Ah, so they think you're a traitor. Yep. Gordy says, well, life is a constant struggle between being an individual and being a member of the community. Can you believe there is a kid who talks like this? Like he's already a college professor impressed with the sound of his own voice? Gordy, I said, I don't understand what you're trying to say to me. Well, in the early days of humans, the community was our only protection against predators and against starvation. We survived because we trusted one another. So back in the day, weird people threatened the strength of the tribe. If you weren't good for making food, shelter, or babies, then you were tossed out on your own. But we're not primitive like that anymore. Oh, yes, we are. Weird people still get banished. You mean weird people like me, I said. And me, Gordy said. All right, then, I said. So we have a tribe of two. And I had the sudden urge to hug Gordy. And he had the sudden urge to prevent me from hugging him. Don't get sentimental, he said. Yep. Even the weird boys are afraid of their emotions. So several times through this, he's sent emails or gotten emails and sent letters. And he is hearing from his sister, who is out in Montana. From there, we go into him talking about basketball. He says he almost didn't try out for the Reardon basketball team. All right. But eventually, I think he's going to decide that he will. His dad gives him some good advice on 136. You have to dream big to get big. Again, if you don't think it can happen, it's not going to happen. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And he has been dreaming big, Arnold has, step by step by step. And so will he continue to do so? His father says, you should at least try. So he does try out. He's going to make it. Arnold and Roger compete hard, pages 138 to 141. All right. But at the end, they're friends. Good job, he said, and offered me his fist. I bumped his fist with me. I was a warrior. And that's when I knew I was going to make the team. Heck, I ended up on the varsity. This is on page 142 as a freshman. All right, so apparently he's pretty good. So again, think about all these ways he's characterized his body. All right, but he's told us also that he's athletic and he makes the team. A good team. All right, a varsity team as a freshman. Says coach said I was the best shooter who'd ever played for him, and I was going to be his secret weapon. Of course, the first game, obviously against their big rival, Welpinit, the tribal school that he used to go to. And apparently they take it personally. They're chanting, Arnold sucks, Arnold sucks, Arnold sucks. They weren't calling me by my res name, Junior. Nope, they were calling me by my Reardon name. As I ran onto the court, somebody in the crowd threw a quarter at me and hit me in the frickin' forehead. They drew blood. He needed stitches, so it takes him out of the game. So that's a lot of hatred. That's a lot of frustration. Says Eugene is the person. Remember, that's sort of the cool friend of his dad's who he looks up to. Eugene gave him 3 stitches in his forehead and it hurt like crazy, but he says, I was ready to play the second half. And of course, we haven't mentioned who's on the other team. It's Rowdy, his best friend, a very good player. So he's get back in the game. And so we get Rowdy versus Arnold round 2. I immediately stole a pass and drove for a layup. Rowdy was right behind me. I jumped into the air, heard the curses of 200 Spokanes, and then saw only a bright light as Rowdy smashed his elbow into my head and knocked me unconscious. Okay, I don't remember anything else from that night, so everything I tell you now is secondhand information. After Rowdy knocked me out, both of our teams got into a series of shoving matches and push fights. The tribal cops had to pull 20 or 30 adult Spokanes off the court before any of them assaulted a teenage white kid. Rowdy was given a technical foul, so we shot 2 free throws for that. I didn't shoot them, of course, because I was already in Eugene's ambulance with my father and father on the way to Spokane. After we shot the technical free throws, the 2 referees huddled. They were 2 white dudes from Spokane who were absolutely terrified of the wild Indians in the crowd and were willing to do anything to make them happy. So they called technical fouls on 4 of our players for leaving the bench and on coach for unsportsmanlike conduct. Yep, 5 technical fouls, 10 free throws. After Rowdy hit the first 6 free throws, coach cursed and screamed and was thrown out of the game. Welpinit ended up winning by 30 points. I ended up with a minor concussion. Yep, 3 stitches and a bruised brain. Nope, I like this other one more, coach said. The quality of a man's life is in direct proposition to his commitment to excellence, regardless of his chosen field of endeavor. So they're sort of sharing quotes, coach and Arnold are after the game. That's a good one. Coach says, it's perfect for you. I've never met anybody as committed as you. So I read that quote again, and I want you to think for a moment, does that really describe Arnold? The quality of a man's life is in direct proportion to his commitment to excellence, regardless of his chosen field of endeavor. Coach thinks that it sums him up pretty well. Partridge in a Pear Tree over on 151 says he found a damp, wrinkled $5 bill in his dad's boot. Merry Christmas, his dad said. This is after his father had sort of disappeared. He could have spent that $5 and stayed drunk for another day or 2, but he saved it for me. It was a beautiful and ugly thing. Thanks, Dad, I said. He was asleep. Merry Christmas, I said, and kissed him on the cheek. $153. I've learned that the worst thing a parent can do is ignore their children. And trust me, there are plenty of Reardon kids who get ignored by their parents. So this chapter is called Red versus White, somewhat ironically named because he's seeing that it really isn't one versus the other, that there's more universality in the lived human experience than there might have been in his mind or that he had recognized earlier. And that suggests that he's, growing as a person. $157, a little bit of tragedy. Talking about his grandmother last week, she was walking back home from a mini powwow at the Spokane Tribal Community Center when she was struck and killed by a drunk driver. Yeah, you read that right. At the hospital, my mother wept and wailed. She'd lost her mother. When anybody, no matter how old they are, loses a parent, I think it hurts the same as if you were only 5 years old, you know. I think all of us are always 5 years old in the presence and absence of our parents. So he's lost his grandmother. Says grandparents aren't supposed to die first, but they're supposed to die. They are supposed to die first, but they're supposed to die of old age. They're supposed to die of a heart attack or a stroke or of cancer or of Alzheimer's. They're not supposed to get run over and killed by a drunk driver. I mean, the thing is, plenty of Indians have died because they were drunk, and plenty of drunken Indians have killed other drunken Indians. But my grandmother had never drunk alcohol in her life, not one drop. That's the rarest kind of Indian in the world. So anyway, he sees it as a little bit of irony that alcohol it affects everybody, but it affects even those who don't drink. Okay, so his grandmother never had a sip, but still is affected by alcoholism. The entire reservation is affected by it in one way or another. Certainly, if we are to take Arnold's word for it, as he talks about it sort of being like a raging pandemic uh, in the res. It says at the grandmother's funeral that almost 2,000 Indians showed up, and even those who had been giving him a hard time waved the white flag that day and let me grieve in peace. And after that, they stopped hassling me whenever they saw me on the res. I mean, I still lived on the res, right? People had either ignored me or called me names or pushed me, but they stopped after my grandmother died. I guess they realized that I was in enough pain already, or maybe they realized they'd been cruel jerks. I wasn't suddenly popular, of course, but I wasn't a villain anymore. And so he revealed how he felt. He literally felt like a villain, a bad guy before this. Billionaire Ted pops up, and he's sort of symbolic of a certain type of white person who wants to sort of appropriate Native American culture. I'm not going to say too much about him, except that it's frustrating that he sort of tries to steal the moment at the funeral, but that's fine. They do sort of have a little bit of fun with him by saying, "Hey, this thing that you thought you have, this artifact, it's fake." All right, it looks more Sioux to me. My mother said, "Maybe Oglala. Maybe I'm not an expert. Your anthropologist wasn't much of an expert either. He got this way wrong." And then Ted just leaves. And then my mother started laughing. 2,000 Indians laughed at the same time. We kept laughing. It was the most glorious noise I'd ever heard. And I realized that sure, Indians were drunk and sad and displaced and crazy and mean, but dang, we knew how to laugh. When it comes to death, we know that laughter and tears are pretty much the same thing. So he feels connected again. But the loss doesn't stop. He's lost his grandmother. On 169, he loses Eugene as well. Way drunk, Eugene was shot and killed by one of his good friends, Bobby, who was too drunk to even remember pulling the trigger. A few weeks later in jail, Bobby hung himself with a bedsheet. And this is his February. He says, After Eugene's funeral, I could have easily killed myself, killed my mother and father, killed the birds, killed the trees, and killed the oxygen in the air. More than anything, I wanted to kill God. I was joyless. I mean, I can't even tell you how I found the strength to get up every morning. And yet every morning I did get up and go to school. Well, that's not exactly true. And so he does start to miss school. And this is perhaps his lowest point. And I can't recall whether I skipped this or not, but his sister dies too. She dies in a fire. And so these are three big losses that he's suffered in the time that he shares with us in this book. So Eugene dies, his grandmother dies, and his sister dies. And they're all alcohol related deaths, being his sister being too drunk to get up out of the fire, to even realize that thing was on fire. She probably was passed out. And we do know that that part is taken from Sherman Alexi's life, as is much of the novel. This interesting show of solidarity on 175 with the whomp, whomp, whomp of the textbooks. Um, Gordy is defending him when the teacher says, "You really shouldn't be missing class this much." Uh, Gordy defended me. He stood with his textbook and dropped it. Whomp, he looked like a warrior. He was protecting me like Rowdy used to protect me. Then the athletes, the basketball players. Then all of my classmates walked out of the room, a spontaneous demonstration. And this also helps him to have a realization and to grow as a person. This is a very important part of the text. This is over on page 176. "What are you laughing at?" Miss Jeremy asked me. "I used to think the world was broken down by tribes," I said, "by black and white, by Indian and white. But I know that isn't true. The world is only broken into two tribes, the people who are a-holes and the people who are not." I walked out of the classroom and felt like dancing and singing. It all gave me hope. It gave me a little bit of joy. So on the one hand, he's getting out of this two tribes mentality, right? It's not black and white. It's not Indian and white. It's not rich and poor. All right. On the other hand, he turns it back around and says, "Well, it's not the dichotomy I thought it was. It's these two different tribes, those who are jerks and those who are not." All right. So in some ways, it shows growth. In other ways, maybe not so much. He makes all the lists over on 177, 176, 178. All right. He says, I keep writing and rewriting and drawing and redrawing and rethinking and revisiting and revising and re-editing. So this idea of making lists of his favorite things became part of his grieving ceremony. And so we see how he sort of comes out of that low point. He has help from his friends. Right? He gets some solidarity that he didn't expect, both from the people on the res and at the school. He talks with a counselor. He makes these lists. And he sort of starts to come out of his depression. That doesn't mean he's not still sad about all of the people that he's lost, but that he is moving forward to something. He talks more about basketball moving forward. Interesting thing here about basketball that also is a metaphor for his life. I suppose it has something to do with confidence. I mean, I'd always been the lowest Indian on the reservation totem pole. I wasn't expected to be good, so I wasn't. He's talking about being on the basketball team, okay? But we can also see how that was sort of, again, going back to that cycle of expectation, that self fulfilling prophecy, something that he's trying to get away from, okay? He's trying to move beyond. But in Reardon, my coach and the other players wanted me to be good. They needed me to be good. They expected me to be good. The power of expectations. He says, so, he's starting to score. Says they beat their arch rivals, Davenport, by 33. So we learned that Welpinit is not their arch rival, but it is a strong rivalry that they have with them. Finally, it's time for the rematch with Welpinit. Well, anyway, our record was 12 wins and 1 loss when we had our rematch with Welpinit. This is on page 182. They came to our gym, so I wasn't going to get burned at the stake. In fact, my white fans were going to get to cheer for me like I was some kind of crusading warrior. And there you can see again this sort of interesting, but still dichotomous image here. As for Rowdy, he turned into a stud on his team. He was only a freshman too, but he was averaging 25 points a game. I followed his progress in the sports section. He led the Welpinit Redskins to a 13-0 record. They were the #1 ranked small school in the state. Welpinit had never been ranked that high, and it was all because of Rowdy. We, or Reardon, were ranked #2, so our game was a big deal, especially for a small school battle. And most especially because I was a Spokane Indian playing against his old friends and enemies. A local news crew came out to interview me before the game, and they're asking him about this, okay? And he says something on 184 that, again, is just one of those sections that helps me fall in love with the book, and hopefully maybe you too. Hey, I said, how about I say that it makes me feel like I've had to grow up really fast? And so the camera guy is asking him, can you talk about this experience? And he says, how about I say that it makes me feel like I've had to grow up really fast, too fast, and that I've come to realize that every single moment of my life is important, and that every choice I make is important, and that a basketball game, even a game between two small schools in the middle of nowhere, can be the difference between being happy and being miserable for the rest of my life. Because he's realizing every choice matters. He's also realizing, though, that he has agency. He gets to make many of those choices. He also gets to determine how he feels about those choices and his perspective on the world. And he's also seeing that maybe his perspective is not as absolute or true as it was before he had made these decisions and had these broader experiences. Of course, that's what he wanted to say, okay? What he actually says is when the guy asks, how does it make you feel? He just says, weird. But, at least he shared what he really thought with us. Over on 186, another one of those great moments. He's continuing with this interview. What do you think you have to prove? The guy asked. I have to prove that I'm stronger than everybody else. I have to prove that I will never give up. I will never quit playing hard. And I don't just mean in basketball. I'm never going to quit living life this hard, I'm never going to surrender to anybody. Never, ever, ever. #187. We were all boys desperate to be men, and this game would be a huge moment in our transition. So they're getting ready to have the game with Welpinit. Coach tells him he's starting and you're going to guard Rowdy. Great. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it. 189. Do you understand how amazing it is to hear that from any adult? Do you know how amazing it is to hear that from anybody? And so this makes me think of one of the reasons I try to push students. I think students don't realize that there is a difference between expectation and oppression, and that when someone asks you to do things that might be a little tedious or might even push you, um, we're not trying to oppress you. We're not trying to bring you down. Often, most of us, we don't ask you to do things that we don't believe you can do. We believe that you can be successful at the tasks we ask you to do. We believe that they might be challenging, but that they will push you, whether it's writing an essay, answering some questions, talking in class. Um, and so I want you to think about that too, in terms of what Arnold is saying about having adults that say you can do it. Basically, anytime a teacher gives you an assignment, gives you a challenge, they are saying you can do it. You ever think about that? It's one of the simplest sentences in the world, just 4 words, but they're the 4 hugest words in the world when they're put together. You can do it. I can do it. Let's do it. We all screamed like maniacs as we ran out of the locker room and onto the basketball court, where 2,000 maniac fans were also screaming. His dad's in the audience. He may not have loved me perfectly, but he loved me as well as he could. Rowdy and I pretended that we weren't looking at each other, but man, oh man, we were sending some serious hate signals across the gym. I mean, you have to love somebody that much to also hate them that much too. Bet there's some truth in that. I'm guarding you tonight. You can't stop me. I've been kicking your ass for 14 years. Not tonight, I said. Tonight's my night. Rowdy just laughed. The ref threw up the opening jump ball. Our big guy, Roger, tipped it back toward our point guard, but Rowdy was quicker. He intercepted the pass and raced toward the basket. I ran right behind him. I knew that he wanted to dunk it. I knew that he wanted to send a message to us. It's page 191. I knew he wanted to humiliate us on the opening play. And for a second, I wondered if I should just intentionally foul him and prevent him from dunking. He'd get 2 free throws, but those wouldn't be nearly as exciting as a dunk. But no, I couldn't do that. I couldn't foul him. That would be like giving up. So I just sped up and got ready to jump with Rowdy. I knew he'd fly into the air about 5 feet from the hoop. I knew he'd jump about 2 feet higher than I could, so I needed to jump quicker. And Rowdy rose into the air, and I rose with him. And then I rose above him. That's a symbolic statement. Now, it's unfortunate, but Rowdy, his role in this book is sort of to stay the same. Junior, he does get to rise. And here we see that symbolically played out through sport. Yep, if I believed in magic and ghosts, then I think maybe I was rising on the shoulders of my dead grandmother and Eugene, my dad's best friend, or maybe I was rising on my mother and father's hopes for me. I don't know what happened, but for once, and for the only time in my life, I jumped higher than Rowdy. I rose above him as he tried to dunk it. I took the ball right out of his hands. He thought he was the only Indian Superman. I came down with the ball, spun, and dribbled back toward our hoop. Rowdy, screaming with rage, was close behind me. Our crowd was insanely loud. I mean, sure, that kind of thing happens in the NBA and in college and in the big high schools, but nobody jumped like that in a small school basketball gym. Nobody blocked a shot like that. Nobody took a ball out of a guy's hands as he was just about to dunk. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I wanted to score. I'd taken the ball from Rowdy, and now I wanted to score in his face.
Williams, if you're still near the front office, please come back up.
I wanted to absolutely demoralize him. I raced for our hoop, Rowdy screaming behind me. My teammates told me later that I was grinning like an idiot as I flew down the court. All right, so then he takes a three-pointer and he buries it. Just swish that sucker, and the gym exploded. My dad hugged the white guy next to him, didn't even know him, but hugged and kissed him like they were brothers. My mom fainted. Really? She just leaned over a bit, bumped against the white woman next to her, and was gone. She woke up 5 seconds later. The school band played a song. Well, the band members were all confused and excited, so they played a song, sure, but each member of the band played a different song. All that fuss for the score of 3-0. But trust me, the game was over. It only took like 10 seconds to happen, but the game was already over. Really, it can happen that way. One play can determine the course of a game. One play can change your momentum forever. So you think if he really means one decision can change your life forever. We beat Welpinit by 40 points. And the three-pointer that he made was the only points he made. But Rowdy only scored 4. I stopped him. So he did a great job guarding Rowdy. The buzzer sounded. The game was over. We had killed the Redskins. Yep, we had humiliated them. Well, 195. Then I realized something. I realized that my team, the Reardon Indians, was Goliath. We weren't David. They were the big, unconquerable monster. I mean, geez, all the seniors on our team were going to college. All of the guys in our teams had their own cars. All of the guys on our team had iPods and cell phones and PSPs and 3 pairs of blue jeans and 10 shirts, and mothers and fathers who went to church and had good jobs. Okay, so maybe my white teammates had problems, serious problems, but none of their problems was life-threatening. But I looked over at the well-pitted Redskins, at Rowdy. I knew that 2 or 3 of those Indians might not have eaten breakfast that morning. No food in the house. I knew that 7 or 8 of those Indians lived with drunken mothers and fathers. I knew that one of those Indians had a father who dealt crack and meth. I knew 2 of those Indians had fathers in prison. I knew that none of them was going to college, not one of them. And I knew that Rowdy's father was probably going to beat the crap out of him for losing this game. I suddenly wanted to apologize to Rowdy, to all of the other Spokaneans. I was suddenly ashamed that I'd wanted so badly to take revenge on them. More growth. I mean, having sympathy and empathy for quote unquote your enemy. Of course, these were not really his enemy. Does show growth. I was suddenly ashamed of my anger, my rage, and my pain. I jumped off my white teammate's shoulders and dashed into the locker room. I ran into the bathroom, into a toilet stall, and threw up. And then I wept like a baby. Coach and my teammates thought I was crying tears of happiness, but I wasn't. I was crying tears of shame. I was crying because I had broken my best friend's heart. But God has a way of making things even, I guess. Wellpit never recovered from their loss. They only won a couple more games the rest of the season and didn't qualify for the playoffs. However, we didn't lose another game in the regular season, and we're ranked number 1 in the state as we headed into the playoffs. We played Elmira Cooley Heartline, this tiny farm town team, and they beat us with this kid named Keith hit a crazy half-court shot at the buzzer. It was a big upset. We all cried in the locker room for hours. Coach cried too. I guess that's the only time that men and boys get to cry and not get punched in the face. So he rises above Rowdy, feels great about it, feels like he's taken revenge, but then realizes that he is one of the haves as opposed to one of the have-nots. And so he feels a little differently about things. And again, he's starting to see a broader spectrum of the human condition. So he and Rowdy exchange emails. Talk is more about death over because Russian guys are not always geniuses. He says, I'm 15 years old and I've been to 42 funerals. He talks more about alcohol. It's on page 201 where he learns about his sister. It's your sister. She passed away. So he's lost his grandmother. He's lost Eugene. Now he's lost his sister. I was stunned, but I wasn't sad. The grief didn't hit me right away. Over on 204, 205, he sort of has this laughter fit. You ever laughed inappropriately, but you didn't really know why? That's what he's doing. I started laughing. I was so relieved, so happy that I laughed. I couldn't stop laughing. He's just so happy that his dad's alive. 205, this is where he learns about how his sister died. They had a big party, my father said, and your sister and her husband passed out in the back bedroom. Somebody tried to cook some soup on a hot plate. They forgot about it and left, and a curtain drifted in on the wind and caught the hot plate, and the trailer burned down. She was too freaking drunk to feel any pain when she burned to death. Talks about spitting up a little piece of cantaloupe, which is weird because he didn't like cantaloupe. But his sister had always loved cantaloupe. And so maybe a little bit of magical realism in the book. He dreams about cantaloupe. He and his dad are having such a moment here. I love you, he said. Wow, he hardly ever said that to me. I love you too, I said. I never said that to him. We walked into the house. My mom was curled into a ball on the couch. There were like 25 or 30 cousins there eating all of our food. Somebody dies and people eat your food. Funny how that works. Mom, I said. Oh, Junior, she said, and pulled me onto the couch with her. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Don't leave me, she said. Don't ever leave me. She was freaking out, but who could blame her? She lost her mother and her daughter in just a few months. Whoever recovers from a thing like that? Whoever gets better? 2 days later, we buried my sister in the Catholic graveyard down near the powwow ground. Page 209. I turned and ran out of the graveyard into the woods across the road. I planned on running deep into the woods, so deep that I'd never be found. But guess what? I ran full speed into Rowdy and sent us both sprawling. Yep, Rowdy had been hiding in the woods while he watched the burial. So, they had their moment on the basketball court and they've been emailing back and forth, but they really haven't spent so much time together face to face, Rowdy and Arnold. And it just so happens that Arnold can't deal with uh, the death. He runs away from the graveyard and he runs into Rowdy. And so now they're having this face-to-face meeting that they really haven't had up to this point since since Arnold has left for Reardon. Rowdy, I said, you're crying. I ain't crying, he said, you're crying. I touched my face. It was dry. No tears yet. I can't remember how to cry, I said. That made Rowdy sort of choke. He gasped a little, and more tears rolled down his face. You're crying, I said. No, I'm not. It's okay. I miss my sister too. I love her. I said I'm not crying. It's okay. I reached out and touched Rowdy's shoulder. Big mistake. He punched me. Well, he almost punched me. He threw a punch, but he missed. Rowdy missed a punch. His fist went sailing over my head. Wow, I said, you missed. I missed on purpose. No, you didn't. You missed because your eyes are filled with tears. That made me laugh. Yep, I started laughing like a crazy man again. I rolled around on the cold, frozen ground and laughed and laughed and laughed. I didn't want to laugh. I wanted to stop laughing. I wanted to grab Rowdy and hang on to him. He was my best friend and I needed him, but I couldn't stop laughing. I looked at Rowdy and he was crying hard now. He thought I was laughing at him. Normally, Rowdy would have absolutely murdered anybody who dared to laugh at him, but this was not a normal day. It's all your fault, he said. What's my fault, I asked. Your sister is dead because you left us. You killed her. That made me stop laughing. I suddenly felt like I might never laugh again. Rowdy was right. I had killed my sister. Well, I didn't kill her, but she only got married so quickly and left the res because I had left the res first. She was only living in Montana in a cheap trailer house because I had gone to school in Reardon. She had burned to death because I had decided that I wanted to spend my life with white people. It was all my fault. Of course it's not. Again, it's his perception of reality, not actual reality. I hate you, Rowdy screamed. I hate you. I hate you. And then he jumped up and ran away. Remember what he said over on page 191? By having to love someone that hard, to also hate them that hard. He'd never run away from anything or anybody, but now he was running. I wondered if I'd ever see him again. "213. He realizes that people are worried about him. I walked inside into the crowded hallways, and all sorts of boys and girls and teachers came up and hugged me and slapped my shoulder and gave me little punches in the belly. They were worried for me. They wanted to help me with my pain. I was important to them. I mattered. Wow. All these white kids and teachers who were so suspicious of me when I first arrived had learned to care about me. Maybe some of them even loved me. And I'd been so suspicious of them. And now I cared about a lot of them and loved a few of them. Penelope came up to me last. She was weeping. Snot rained down her face, and it was still sort of sexy. I'm so sorry about your sister, she said. I didn't know what to say to her. What do you say to people when they ask you how it feels to lose everything, when every planet in your solar system has exploded? I'm going to take a small break, and when I come back, I'll start another video to finish this out. This has been, like I said, a sort of stream of consciousness walkthrough of the text. If it helps you, that's great. If not, no big deal. But it's there. Tell your peers, if you're talking with them, that this is there if you think it will help them. So this will be the second of 3 videos that I will post. And I hope you're doing well. I hope you're getting a lot out of the book. And see you next time.